Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. This week is episode number 178 of the show, and I have 5 new LitRPG reviews just for you folks. And that includes The Merchant of Death, a LitRPG adventure series, Eternal War book number 1. Also being reviewed this week is Slimegirl. Then The Crafter's Dungeon, a dungeon core novel, Dungeon Crafting book number 1. After that, it is going to be Collecting the Goddess, a LitRPG adventure, Chronicles of KieraFreya, book number 1. And then Nora Hazard, book number 3. So all kinds of great stuff coming up. But before we get into that, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with a story just of congratulations to an author who's done particularly well this last week. Jonathan Brooks, author of The Crafter's Dungeon, a dungeon core novel. His novel came out last week and it did great, hitting the top 200 on Amazon, and it is still in the top 200 on Amazon this entire last week or so. And that is really quite an accomplishment, gotta say. So want to give a quick shout out to Jonathan Brooks for his successful launch. We do this sometimes on the show just to honestly celebrate a LitRPG author who has done well, and we always like to acknowledge those good things because they're rare than we like, obviously, but still. So congratulations to Jonathan Brooks for doing such an amazing job on the launch of his latest novel. Okay, also in LitRPG news, we have Tao Wong, author of the System Apocalypse series and the Adventures on Brand series. He's heading to DragonCon this year. Yay! In addition to that announcement on Facebook and his blog, he said that he's actually going to be bringing signed copies of his novels for fans who wish to purchase them. So, yeah, that's actually really cool. Actually, a really good idea. If you're going to have fans there and you're going to have LitRPG authors there, then why not? Excuse me. Then he does ask, though, that you do let him know if you want an advance or want a signed copy. You can go to his website. He has a whole list of like little steps to do, including telling which book you want, of course. You're going to have to pay for the novel, which is reasonable if he's going to have them printed up. Remember, the physical copies are more expensive than ebook copies. He'll ask for a deposit and basically he's going to schedule a couple places for fans to meet him and to pick them up. So not only will you get the book, you're going to get a chance to meet Tao Wong himself. So there you go. So all kinds of great stuff. And if you want more details on that, we have a link in the show notes to his website, mylifemytao.com. And there's a link there. So go check that out. Okay, on to stuff that is out now. Haven't had a chance to read it. Well, I read this first one, but most of this I haven't had a chance to read. It is available, though, including Project Alpha book number 2. Yay! That's mine. Full disclosure. It is out. It is available. It's off pre-order. We had a nice free deal last week with book 1 being free. That is obviously not available any longer, but book 2 is out and it's gotten some nice reviews, good sales numbers, and people have messaged me saying how much they've really enjoyed it. So go check it out if you want to do me a favor. But also I think it's a good book, but I'm biased, obviously. Okay. Also out this last week includes Guardian Craft Primeval, book number 1 by Eden Red. This one is supposed to be a little more crafting oriented. According to the author, it still has adult content though, but it is minimized according to that author. So just be aware of that. All the novels from Eden are usually adult oriented, and they usually have a sex scene or something. So that's just how that author chooses to write. So that is out now for you to enjoy. Also out now is Hunter's Dream Online by J.R. Davis. So this was something that's on Royal Road previously. It is out currently. I think there is also supposed to be an audiobook version of this. Even on the cover it says voiced by Steve Campbell. There's no audiobook currently as of this particular podcast, but the ebook seems to be out. So there you go. Okay, new and LitRPG audiobooks. Few novels have come out, actually more than the ebooks this week, including His Staff, a sci-fi LitRPG adventure, Skeleton in Space. I actually enjoyed it. Very interesting story about a skeleton in space. with some liturgy powers. Okay, also Galacticon book number 2, In Search of the Eldens, is also out as an audiobook, as is the 4th book in the Good Guy series, For the Loot. Equalize, this one actually came out at the end of last week, so we just missed it on the podcast last week, so it's been out for a little while. But Equalize, a post-apocalyptic LitRPG. Ether Collapse is also out as an audiobook, so all kinds of great stuff there. On to upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read off the stuff that's coming out in the near future. Feel free to skip ahead if you're not interested, but there are also new titles for this list, so it's very useful sometimes to get to plan your purchases. And also just to know when your favorite authors are coming out. On July the 12th, it'll be the 3rd book in the Axe Druid series, Into the Hells, by Christopher Johns. On July the 15th, the sequel to The Goblin King called Beast Queen will be out. On July the 18th, the Time Master Interworld Network book number 1. On July the 19th, Controlling the Goddess, Chronicles of KieraFreya, book number 2. This is the sequel to the book that we're actually reviewing on the podcast this week. On July 23rd, it'll be Cannibal Demon of the Mind, a post-apocalypse survival lit RPG series. On July 24th, Quest for Vengeance. On July 26th, this one's exciting. I mean, they're all very nice, exciting, I'm sure. But The Completionist Chronicles book number 4 by Dakota Crowd will be out, called Raise. This is such a fan favorite. I'm excited for it. But it'll be out on July 26th of this month, ladies and gentlemen. So definitely go check that out. July 30th, it'll be Sky Realms Online. July 31st, Imprisoned Online. So many onlines. On August 1st, it'll be Shade's First Rule, Divine Apostasy, book number 1. This one, the author asked me to add it to the list because he said it is 100% LitRPG. I tried to make sure that the author had read our website's qualifications for what LitRPG is. He still assures me it is. The novel description doesn't mention much about LitRPG or game mechanic stuff. But there you go. It's out there. It's going to be available on August 31st. And just have to take it on a bit of faith until I have a chance to actually read it. So there you go. On August the 5th, it'll be Here Go, Champion is Playing, book number 3. On August the 8th, it'll be Invasion, book number 1, A Second Chance. August the 10th, the 6th book in the Eden's Gate series called The Ascent. On August the 12th, it'll be Dungeons of the Crooked Mountains, Underdog, book number 1. On August the 15th, also from Eric Uglin, Scamps and Scoundrels, the first book in the Bad Guy series. On August 22nd, it'll be the 2nd book in the Iron Will series, the Dragonheart Iron Will. It's a LitRPG Wuxia series. So on August the 30th, there's also new to the list, the 3rd book in the Galacticon series by Vasily Mihenko. August 31st, it'll be Zones of Alacria. Sometime in August, we're supposed to get another book from Blaze Corbin and Alex Foster called First Song, book number 2, which I actually really enjoyed, book number 1. September 2nd, The Game of Villains, Book of Karak, book number 1. September the 6th, the 2nd book in the Khazarian online series called Cliffs of Eldamar. On September the 9th, Bloods of Fate, World 99, book number 1, a LitRPG Wuxia series by Dan Serlinoff, so another Russian author. And that'll be it for for stuff that's upcoming in the future. On to new releases and reviews. And this week we're going to begin with The Merchant of Death, a LitRPG adventure series, Eternal War Online, book number 1. It is written by Jared Mandani, who's written several other LitRPG stories that kind of hit and miss sometimes. This one is 342 pages. It is $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. After a mission gone awry, secret operative John Taggart's identity is compromised. He needs to go into hiding until he can afford the surgery to get a new face. All the cash he had left, he invested to buy a hacked virtual reality collar off of the black market. For a wanted man such as himself, this was the only way to make any kind of money without further jeopardizing his location and identity. There's a problem, though. When he first logs onto Eternal War Online and chooses his faction, the network detects his unauthorized device and generates a bunch of critical errors. Immediately, there's a hotfix that is applied which erases all his selections. John is sent into the Eternal Battlefield, the highest level PvP area of the game, obviously with no chance of survival. Limited to one character by collar, John finds himself in a dire situation. With no faction to back him up, he's a free target for everyone. And with no fighting skills and no gear except for a pair of cotton briefs, he's no match for any of the players. John will keep dying and respawning in that impossible location, but as he tries to keep to the shadows and stay alive, he will soon find that his strange predicament is not without benefits. For one, his lack of ties to any faction allows him to loot every corpse, which will lead him to unlock secret classes like Salvager and Smuggler. Secondly, while every faction has its own language that prevents players from different groups from talking to each other, he's not restricted by that constraint and can understand everyone. Unable to join the fight as every blow sustained results in his insta-death, John will discover that his only chance to start earning some cash will be to partner up with the criminal underworld in the game and set up salvaging operations. For a fee, he will loot and return your soul-bound items, allowing you to skip the 6-hour wait period before they materialize back in your inventory. Also, he will experiment with crafting and creating weapons and enchantments that will start to shake things up in the game. Obviously, not everyone will take kindly to his bold moves, and John will extract the wrath of a few powerful players, but then you can't expect to please everyone when you're making a name for yourself as a merchant of death. So there we go. That's a very wordy description, but it does a good job of describing essentially the main story points. The cover art on this is really nice. It's actually what drew me to it. It was like, oh, that's really pretty and colorful, and it has some nice notification stuff, which is always a good way to catch a LitRPG reader's attention. I like that. I actually like the idea of a merchant character in a LitRPG story. So those ideas are very fascinating. The execution here, unfortunately, started out decently, but it eventually became kind of disappointing for me, at least. Eventually, and that's mostly because I realized, even though the story has a lot of notifications, it feels like the game mechanics are dictated by the story and not the other way. And this is just honestly a personal writing style that every author kind of has to choose at some point, whether or not they're going to have create a game world and let the story be shaped by the rules of that world. The same way that, you know, in stories on Earth, you know, the story is sometimes shaped by physics, and that some things are possible, some things aren't. Or in magical fantasy stories, you know, the story is sometimes shaped by the actual rules that the author has set for magical stuff. The other option is that as your story progresses, you're shaping your rules to accommodate that story. And sometimes that works out really well. In this case, it didn't work for me. Often in the story, it felt like new rules were made just to push the story in a certain direction or justify this particular premise that didn't really make sense to my gamer brain. And in the story, there were often exceptions made to the game rules, and that they were ignored. Like the established game rules that were put in place were ignored as the story went on in the favor of some particular story point, or just because they didn't mesh or the author didn't care about them anymore for some reason. And so all that kind of concludes into like this ending that was honestly just kind of disappointing and rushed for me. So that's kind of the summary review. The story itself follows one player who gets glitched. And actually the novel description does a really good job of like describing this better than I do probably. He can't join the game's 3 factions. He can't fight. And that's kind of an interesting point. It's supposed to be because he gets respawned so often, gets this huge XP penalty for combat specifically. And also he's level 1, so he's not really losing levels. And he has to figure out some other way to level and to survive. And so he becomes a smuggler and a scavenger. And he tries to create a way to earn in-game money so he can afford his thing. His face surgery, as described in the novel description. And he starts building a criminal empire with the different factions and the groups. And it's an interesting story in that respect, that aspect of it. Oh, that was like a nice thing. But, you know, because the main character's ability to fight is cut off very early in the story, there is no action here. I mean, there's a little bit of action towards the end of the story, but it feels a little forced because you can tell, like, as soon as you see, like, oh, that I know where that's going to go. But overall, there's not really a lot of action here. And again, that's mostly because the main character does not have a way to fight, and he's insta-killed apparently by anybody who hits him, no matter what level he is, which means the levels don't matter. But that's a separate issue. But there's really nothing to replace that excitement from combat. There's a little bit of tension with him creating connections with the various criminal elements in the three factions, but he's never really going to lose anything because he just respawns, and so there's not really a ton of tension here. Eventually, the story kind of loses steam for me, and you get a lot more summaries towards the end of like the last third of the story. Instead of actually showing events anymore, the author just summarizes like, oh, sometimes I think there's going to be a really big fight up ahead, and then it's like the next chapter, oh, and nope, just a little brief summary of like, oh, this happened, and they move on. I'm like, oh, that's unfortunate. You can kind of feel like the author seemed to have run out of steam in that last third of the novel, especially at the very end, and it was just, again, kind of got disappointing. On the game mechanic side, the story is LitRPG technically. The main character starts off with a broken character. He levels up. He gets some professions. He gains stats. And there are a lot of item descriptions, at least in the first half of the story. However, though those elements exist, the story progresses, and you can tell that the game mechanics don't matter. And that was just was really disappointing to me, because like I come into LitRPG, I specifically read it because I love those game mechanics. I love learning about the rules of this world and how they can be exploited or learned about, to quantifiably show progress, to make me feel like I'm that character and that I'm getting better and I'm getting more powerful. And if those game mechanics don't matter, if the story is just going to do what it does regardless of what those game mechanics are, then that just loses my favorite element of the story. And again, this doesn't happen initially. Like I said, the initial beginning of the story, that isn't shown. Like the story feels relatively, because there's a lot of info dumping, like, oh, this is what the game world is, these mechanics, etc. But then as the story continues on, especially after the 40% mark, you can really tell that, oh, all the stuff that was built up doesn't really matter, because they're ignored by the story. And just a couple examples of, like, there's a really big experience in the beginning of the novel where the XP penalty is huge, and the main character dies again and again and again in that PvP zone that's described in the novel description, and it's a huge XP penalty loss. But when that same thing happens again later on after the 40% mark, there is no XP penalty. The main character doesn't lose levels. He doesn't lose experience points, and there's no consequences for dying suddenly. And it's just one of those things like, oh, this game mechanic is being ignored even though it was previously established. The same thing with those soulbound items. In the beginning of the story, those soulbound items are worthless to the main character because they're just going to reappear in in those characters' inventories because they're soulbound. You know, they actually should. I don't think they should even be takenable from a body, but. Later on in the story, and it's also clearly established that the main character shouldn't be able to use soulbound items in any way, shape, or form because they're bound to somebody else. But again, later in the story, the main character is just, oh, look, he's stealing soulbound items left and right, selling them off to characters that aren't the owners, and even using them. And I'm like, oh, that's a total breaking of the rules. And there's just like a lot of those examples as the story continues on, where it's like, oh, it's more fun to write this particular story, and I'm not going to dispute that. But it does have to break the rules of that already established. I'm like, that always kind of bugs my brain. And if it doesn't bug you, you might just like this story better than me. But as the story progresses, like even a lot of the game mechanics just kind of disappear after the 66% mark of the story. You can really tell, like, oh, most of the game mechanics are being completely ignored. Notifications become less prevalent, and RPG progress ceases to. As a matter of fact, after that last third of the story, I think there's a mention of levels once, and that's kind of it. And that the main character progresses anyway, and even throughout the story as a whole, like you see those levels really don't matter, except for the fact that he gains a couple levels in the beginning that allows him to get a couple professions. But after that, like, none of that really has any impact on the story in any way, shape, or form, which is unfortunate. The game rules still does, obviously, but like the RPG progression doesn't really matter, which is unfortunately disappointing for me. Overall, again, I like the idea of the story of a merchant focused LitRPG's character, and I actually like the criminal element of it. I thought, okay, that's a nice attempt to make this more interesting. The RPG portion of the story, though, the RPG progression, just doesn't seem to matter, and eventually does disappear. So I just kind of lost interest in the story, because that's the part of LitRPG stories I like, the RPG stuff, and it doesn't, there are issues here with the story with it, at least for me. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. Merchant of Death, a LitRPG adventure series, Eternal War, online book number 1 with a score of 6 out of 10. It doesn't work for me. And next is Slimegirl, written by Josh Hatfield of the JVJ podcast. It is 281 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here is the author's description. In the year 2101, Islands allows users to become whoever they want to be. A 19-year-old Sylvia Grohl is excited for her first semester in a new school, but all thoughts of higher education vanish when she starts receiving strange packages at home, packages she didn't order. As Sly delves deeper into the underbelly of Islands to find the source of the mysterious packages, she finds herself caught in a dangerous love triangle in a world where she can't tell friend from foe. Can she unravel the mystery without alienating everyone around her, or will the consequences of her own actions finally catch up with her? Okay, so that's the novel description. It's fairly accurate. I think there's a little more of a threadish thing going on there that doesn't play up for a lot of the story. First of all, let me say right off the bat, this novel didn't work for me. Even just looking at the cover, you can tell that there's an emphasis on like this romantic element. It is LitRPG technically. And I think even though it didn't work for me personally, I think the author has potential. At least there were several aspects of the story that I actually liked, even if on the whole, the novel didn't work for me personally. And that's really what a 6 out of 10 is. Like, oh, this doesn't work for me, but I'm going to specify what didn't work for me. And if those things don't matter to you, you may enjoy this more than I did. And that's what that means. First of all, the stuff that I actually enjoyed in the story. One, the biggest selling point in the story, which is not highlighted at all, is definitely the humor. It has this snarky, fun, bantery dialogue and sense of humor that I thought was really undersold, even in the novel description and even by the author. Especially the dialogue between the main character and her mom. That is, if that's all the novel was, if it was just those conversations, this would have gotten like a much better score. Those conversations make me laugh even thinking about it now. It's good banter. It's also a good relationship development between the main character and mom. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. The second thing I liked about the story was a couple of the RPG scenes. Again, this is taken LitRPG. I don't get into why it's on the technical side. But there are a couple RPG scenes towards the end of the story that I actually thought were original and were interesting. The ones earlier in the novel, not so much. But the ones later in the story, especially the last two, the Taco Bell sponsored heist, I thought was really neat. And the last PvP I thought was really well done. But the ones that are earlier in the story have issues. I don't get into that. So on to the stuff that didn't work for me. This is slightly longer. One, the core story is basically VR high school dating drama. It is. That's what it is. And yes, the main character is supposed to be in college, but it feels like a high school drama because it's the main character's first relationship, her first kiss, a first time two boys have liked her at the same time and she just can't choose between them. And I'm just not into that kind of story. It's just not my kind of thing. And that is totally personal preference. But I don't have anything else to base a review on basically besides personal preferences. I'm more into like actiony stuff. And that's okay. Like I said, if you like this kind of story setting, and if you're, you might like this more than that's perfectly okay. We can have different taste. And like I said, I would actually recommend this to anybody who likes like this high school VR relationship. That would absolutely be the case. It just didn't work for me personally. And that's probably the biggest aspect of it because it doesn't focus on any RPG stuff. It focuses instead on literally just virtual reality high school dating drama. The main character logs into a game. It's this virtual reality world. She goes to this college and she meets a couple of boys. And it's really about her new relationship and her feeling confused about, oh, two boys like me and what am I supposed to do with them, and going on dates with them. And it's just set in virtual reality, and they go on some RPG dates basically where they do things in virtual reality that happens to level her, and not in like sexual ways, just like literally just like, oh, she gets into levels, she develops class stuff, and all that does exist, but it's not the focus of the story. And that brings me to the next point. The RPG stuff in the story, it felt like it wasn't really that important. Like you could, yes, it exists. The main character levels. I thought there were some nice put into her class and her race progress, which is a slime girl. But ultimately, on the whole, it doesn't matter to the story. If you took those elements out of the story, it would really just be the same story. Like if you took all the RPG elements out of this novel, the main character and her dates would just go on and do other date stuff. In this case, the author chose specifically to make a LitRPG by making those dates RPG related, and RPG progression by giving her like experience points when they completed their dates and stuff and for killing stuff. And so it is technically LitRPG, but again, that's not really the focus here. So there was that. 3, the combat is semi-regular in the story. However, it's not really well written until like the last couple of RPG scenes. And that's just unfortunate. I think it's more along the lines of like, oh, this is the author's first book. He's trying to find his writing style and how to write things well. And he figures it out by towards the end of the story. The beginning, however, is a little rougher, and especially those action scenes. They were like, oh, that's not entertaining to read. A few of those combat scenes and sentences. I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. It's just know what you're getting into. The ending of the story, while it was kind of tense, it was kind of a little bit of a letdown when the big reveal of who the bad guy was. With the reveal, the reader is given like this new information in the form of a flashback showing how it's all started. And I'll honestly disappoint in the respect of like, oh, there's this kind of tension built up throughout the story leading up to this big reveal. And in this kind of like mysterious situation, I expect to be giving clues about, oh, who the bad guy is supposed to be, right? But then with the big reveal, it's like, oh, you're never going to, like, it was presented in such a way that the reader was never going to have been able to figure it out. It really was just like, oh, this flashback from the character putting together all these pieces in a scene where it's like, oh, we were never given this information or any hints about this information that this ever existed, so we were never going to figure it out. And in that way, it was a little disappointing that I as a reader, especially when it's like this mystery kind of threat subtext of like, oh, I should have been given a little more information about what was possible or like clues about it, so that when the big reveal was, either I'd already figured it out and I felt really smart, or the reader in retrospect, like, oh yeah, all those pieces work together, and that would make them feel smart as well. And that just wasn't the case here. Overall, although there are several aspects I liked about the story, again, on the whole, it didn't work for me because it is like 90% of the story is just like, oh, it's VR dating stuff and with high school level like relationship mechanics. And I was like, oh, okay, that's perfectly fine, perfectly valid. It is technically a Liberty story. It's not getting like negative reviews in that respect, but that kind of storyline just doesn't work for me, and that's okay. You can tell as the author is writing the story, he's figuring out his style, he's figuring out his writing, and that's okay. It just takes a little while to get there. I'm not sure everybody's going to be willing to go through the waiting period until it gets really good. But if you like high school romance drama, I think it's worth giving a chance. It just didn't work for me personally. So forget the score of 6 out of 10 from me. That's Slimegirl with the score of 6 out of 10. But again, if you like that kind of storyline, you might like this better than I did. So there you go. And next we have The Crafter's Dungeon, a dungeon core novel, dungeon crafting, book number 1, with this from Jonathan Brooks. There we go. It is 349 pages, $2.99, excellently priced. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Sandra had been a merchant traveling through the human lands of Muriel, though that wouldn't have been her chosen profession. What she would have loved to become was a crafter, producing wondrous creations with her own 2 hands. However, she didn't want to become a master in just one craft. She was interested in them all. Unfortunately, Sandra was born with a deformity in her hands that made them appear frozen in a claw-like pose. As a result, she couldn't grip anything with any sort of strength or dexterity, meaning that she wasn't able to craft anything but the most simple of things that required very little in the way of hand-based manipulation. To top it all off, while most people could access and manipulate at least 1 or 2 of the basic elemental energies, she couldn't. She could see them all, but was unable to manipulate a single one. Despite these setbacks, Sandra spent the majority of her 26 years of life visually learning the processes, techniques, and secret formulas for every aspect of crafting she could discover. And it was that pursuit of knowledge that ultimately led to her untimely death. Reborn in the shape of a tiny dungeon core, Sandra learned about the purpose behind dungeons and cores from an assigned dungeon helper. At the same time, she also discovered that she had a much more freedom than most other dungeon cores. The repercussions of her mere existence could end up being far-reaching, but the most important thing she learned had nothing to do with other cores, the different races, or even the real purpose behind her being brought back to life as a strange glowing gem. Sandra didn't care about any of that, though. All she cared about was that she could finally do some crafting. So there we go. The author also notes that the dungeon core contains literary and game-led elements, stats, leveling, heavy crafting emphasis, no profanity, no harems. So there we go. Short review. This is a good book. It's actually really good. It's a good dungeon core story. The first third of it is entirely dungeon core stuff. Setting up the rules and the systems and everything. And you don't actually get to crafting though until after the 33% mark. So the first third of it is really just like set up the main character, like how she dies, how she lives, how she's reborn, and the initial like setup of like the dungeon core rules. After the 30% mark, then it really leans into that crafting stuff, and you get a good detailed system of crafting, all the things the dungeon can do, and hints at the larger series plot lines, and how crafting enters into that and makes it all important. The story is really crunchy. There's lots of notifications, lots of game mechanic details, lots of details about crafting itself and like the various types of crafting. And I think readers really enjoy and love, especially if you like crafting, you're going to love that aspect of it. Overall, this is a good dungeon core novel with good crafting and RPG progression. Personally, I would have actually liked to have seen more dungeon runs. That's probably one thing that the dungeon core novel kind of misses a little bit. It makes sense that this is still a kind of a setup novel that focuses on non-combat specifically. So that might not be a major element. But I would have loved to have seen more dungeon runs because it is a dungeon core novel. So if you're only setting with traps and nothing's coming through them to see if they work or if they fail, that makes it slightly less interesting in that dungeon core aspect. But on the crafting side, really good. And again, that's not really, it's a minor thing. It doesn't really ruin the story or anything. I still had a good time with it. And hopefully it's something we'll see in future books. For me, good score 7.6 out of 10. Had a good time with it. That's The Crafter's Dungeon, a dungeon core novel, dungeon crafting book number 1, with the score of 7.6 out of 10. Go check it out. And next we have Collecting the Goddess, a LitRPG adventure, Chronicles of KieraFreya, book number 1, written by Michael Anderle. This is 616 pages, $4.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. What is a billionaire heiress supposed to do with all of her older siblings take to business like her parents, proving that business is in their blood, but not hers? There are many good choices. Unfortunately, Chloe decided that partying was the right one. Now, a requirement to keep her money requires her to attend daily meetings with a family psychologist. A daily meeting about how she should change her life to change her future. The worst part, the meetings are before noon, so she has to get up early. Then he presents her with an offer. Invest in a new game company and become the first player to stay inside their full immersion pod for 2 years. 2 years away from her parents looking down on her and not having to listen to her siblings with their success. Done. There is only one problem, rather. Chloe's avatar connects to a goddess of retribution who doesn't remember her past. Following the rabbit trail of armor to help the goddess will require more responsibility from Chloe than she has ever accepted in the past. Will she return to being the party girl of her past, or will the Lagarde daughter, tempered in fire from her upbringing, wake up? Go up and, there you go. That's it. Okay. This is a story from Michael Anderle, who's a write-to-market author, and this is his first true LitRPG one that he's advertised as such. And it doesn't really work on the RPG side for me. It works as the story itself is decently written, and I think a lot of people find it entertaining just as itself. It's okay, but it felt more like a virtual reality adventure story with some notifications and stat increases that didn't really matter. So on the game mechanic side, it honestly kind of fails for me because ultimately the game mechanic RPG progression stuff doesn't matter. That it's set in the virtual reality game, very clear, makes sense. The storyline itself is okay. after about the 10% mark, the setup is actually pretty decent. But after the 10% mark, the main character gets a ton of unearned power and is really kind of led by her nose on a bunch of adventures. So the character progression doesn't really exist in that respect. But the adventures themselves aren't terribly written. They just weren't particularly interesting for me because the RPG progression portion of it didn't really matter to the story, and sometimes there were conflicts that I'll get into. Okay, a lot of the story on its own felt like it was a little paint by numbers to make it LitRPG. There's nothing particularly bad about the story or this aspect of it, but it wasn't interesting either. There's some unrealistic behavior for the main character. There was also some plot holes that fed into this cyberpunk sub-story that I found a little annoying. Again, that's more personal. Like, I'm not big into cyberpunk being mixed into LitRPG. It's never really worked for me. And I've read quite a few stories where they've tried and it just doesn't work. Still, there's also like this slight in-game inconsistency within NPCs where some are aware that this is a game in some respects and some aren't. And I wish there was just more consistency in that respect. Also, the established game mechanics, which are established early in the game, in the story, but they were ignored whenever the story needs them to be, whenever the story needs to do something. And this is, again, one of those issues where, like, the story is dictating whether or not the game mechanics are followed. So even if they're established, if they're not followed in the story, it feels like those RPG mechanics don't matter, which is always a thing for me in LitRPG. And again, that's a personal thing. If that doesn't matter to you, this will be less of an issue. As the story goes on, the RPG mechanics and progression lessens more and more, and you can kind of tell that the author got tired of continuing with the RPG mechanics and notifications because they're fairly regular and consistent in the beginning of the story, but by the mid and end of the story, like, where'd all that RPG stuff go? And I'm like, okay, it is what it is. Story-wise, this is okay. It's not a terrible setup. Again, there are some larger plot holes that I was like, I can see like why they're there to justify certain things in the story, but they don't really make sense. And some of the story twists don't make sense either to me sometimes, but still, on the whole, it's not a badly written story in any shape or form. Otherwise, it's just kind of like this random adventuring and fighting. Main character fights bad guys, monsters, makes online friends, fights with her equipment on a regular basis. The banter was decent enough between her equipment, the goddess, and herself. But there was very little world building and character development. And I thought that was a little odd. It is what it is, though. Overall, this is technical RPG. It is. The RPG aspects of the story don't really seem to matter. And again, the story seems to ignore them whenever it needs to, even going against the established mechanics, which makes it feel just more like a virtual reality adventure story, which is some things that the author's written before. I don't know that the author is particularly a gamer. It doesn't feel like it, though. And that just may be what's showing here, in that those aspects aren't as important to him. The storyline, the story of being in a virtual world and having these responsibilities might just be more important to him. And that's what shows up a little more. Again, for me, it's not really a bad story. It's not good, though. And again, I couldn't get into the story just because, again, the RPG stuff didn't seem to matter that much. It felt like, especially towards the end of the story, it felt like, the effort wasn't there anymore from an otherwise good author. Like, I know Mike Anderle has a lot of fans, and his writing is generally good. And again, this isn't bad writing, but it's usually in other genres. And this is his first swing at this one, and I don't think it succeeds, for me at least. And I hope it improves in the future. But this one didn't work for me. That's what it comes down to. This one gets a score of 6 out of 10. That's Collecting the Goddess, a LitRPG adventure, Chronicles of KieraFreya, a book number 1. And next is Nora Hazard, book number 3, Accounts Payable, written by Blaise Corvin. It is 329 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The last 3 years have not been easy for Nora Hazard, but she's been able to create a new life for herself. Since becoming ore bonded, she's managed to survive, then thrive. She's mastered her power and grown up during her time as a soldier, even experiencing love. but circumstances will force Nora to make new choices. Her deal with the powerful demigoddess is coming to an end, bringing new opportunities and new dangers, including secret information about her painful, mysterious past. Her loyalties will be put to the test. Unfortunately, despite her survivor mentality, her luck is terrible. Trouble seems to follow her wherever she goes. After uncovering a massive plot that directly threatens everything she holds dear, she will be forced into a struggle that pushes her to her very limits. For Nora Hazard, nothing is ever simple, but she made a promise to someone important to never give up. She's been wounded in spirit and body, but remains unbroken. Anyone or anything that picks a fight with her or threatens her friends may come to regret it, even a dark god. So there we go. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review. I purchased a copy when it became available. I always like this series. And I'm always saddened when the author says oh, this is one of his series that is less, popular. And I think that's some unfortunate. This novel in particular in this series is probably the most action filled, and I think it's going to have the most appeal in that respect, because there's fights galore from beginning to end in this thing, and it is the last in the standalone Nora Hazard series line. From here on in, it'll still tie into that character is going to appear apparently in LLC, which is the main series in the story universe. But what a conclusion. There's tons of action. It does a really good job of resolving all the story threads from the series. I'm super surprised that how many of those plot lines you're just like, oh yeah, you remember this one? You don't remember this one? I don't care. I'm going to finish it off. I'm going to tie it up for you. And I was like, oh, I genuinely as a reader was like, oh, there's a lot of stuff I kind of forgot happened in book one, or like little threads and that the author was really sure about like concluding and tying off. So I'm like, super impressed that he even remembered to keep track of all those things, because it's a lot. The big highlight of the story is definitely going to be the action. There's so much of it that I was surprised that there was still room for character development. The fights are not only well written and actiony, they also expand the way the main character fights, both as in groups and solo. Some really good stuff. Again, it's one of those things where like, oh, the author is showing that the main character has mastered her powers. And is expanded to the way she fights, and good stuff. On the game mechanics side, things are still light, but this series on a whole has been light in that respect, so it shouldn't really be too big of a surprise. There still is RPG progression. The main character gets new powers. She decides on what she's going to expand her power system with, and she gets more orbs, more powers. I forget what they're called specifically now. I can't remember. Spirit stones, yeah. More spirit stones to expand them in the future. But again, that's the system in this world. And in this particular novel, it was always a little bit lighter. But it still exists. Additionally, one of the things that's a little bit lessened is the emotional growth in book 3 compared to the other two novels. In books 1 and 2, I thought there was a lot of like really good emotional growth for the main character. And in book 3, it feels more like she's already settled into who she's going to be by the beginning of the story. And that part of that has to do with the fact that there's this multi-year time jump for the main character between books 2 and book 3. And part of that is to catch her up to the LLC series. The other part is just to kind of skip ahead through all the military stuff, which is where the book ended in book 2. But because there was that multi-year gap, you were starting the story with her kind of already becoming like really comfortable with who she is, her powers, her role as a leader, and a lot of other like emotional like moments. She's had years to essentially kind of deal with those emotional revelations and issues that she had in books 1 and book 2. So from the beginning of the book to the end of book 3, like she's kind of the same character, and that's okay. Like it really is. Like she's super strong. She's a little more emotionally stable. She still rages, of course, which is a Nora Hazard, standard quality. But she's not, there's not that emotional like ups and downs, that character progression. There is some. There are definitely emotional moments in the story that I thought were kind of neat. But a lot of her growth has already kind of concluded in that respect. She does grow in other ways. There are other types of character progression she does in book 3. The emotional stuff of those is just lessened. And speaking of resolutions, man, there's a lot. Like I said, stuff that I had forgotten about personally in books 1 and 2. They're all resolved. As far as I can tell, all the storylines are tied up. And it really just makes you feel like the author is giving his best effort to make this conclusion to this series as satisfying as possible. So thank you, Blaze Corbin. Overall, I think this is a good ending to the series. I was pleasantly surprised again how the author ends up tying Nora Hazard back into the Delvers LLC series. So yeah, I'm completely happy with this. But again, I'm also a fan of this author and this writing in particular. So take that all with a grain of salt. I'm already was a fan before I started this novel. So for me, it gets a score of 7.7 out of 10. That's Nora Hazard, book number 3, Accounts Payable, with a score of 7.7 out of 10. And that's it for the show, everybody. Thank you very much for hanging out with me today. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, our website. If you want to support the podcast this week, definitely go check out Project Alpha Book 2, written by me. If you haven't read it, Book 1 is available on Kindle Unlimited, as is Book 2. And, of course, check out all the other stuff I've written. It helps to support me and the podcast in that respect. Of course, we have links in the show notes for a bunch of other LitRPG groups and Facebook pages where the authors and readers all get to hang out and combine. It's a fun bunch of groups. But until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.